When my father passed away, I never expected to inherit the largest portion of his estate. The news hit my stepmother hard, and she quickly reached out, demanding what she believed was a fair share. But after everything that had happened between us, I wasn't about to give in easily. My relationship with my father had been strained for years. By the time I was 20, I had already cut ties with him. The decision wasn't made lightly, but it was a long time coming. I moved out of our house when I was 17, distancing myself from the man who had caused so much pain. The reasons for our estrangement were numerous, but they all boiled down to how he treated my mother during her illness and after her death. My mother had been the heart of our family, and watching her suffer through her terminal illness was unbearable. But instead of supporting her, my father seemed to lose all sense of decency. He attempted to start an affair with my mum's sister while she was still alive, yelled at her for being sick, and, in a fit of rage, burned several of our family photos after her death. It was as if he wanted to erase any memory of the life we had before. But the most painful act was when he sold my mum's easel, a cherished item that held so much sentimental value for me and my relatives. That easel had been with her for most of her life, and its loss felt like another piece of her was gone forever. I was just 13 at the time, but I already knew that something was deeply wrong with my father. When he met his second wife, everything changed even more. He moved her into our home, and in the process, he carelessly discarded many of my mother's belongings. My aunts and uncles tried to save what they could, storing away what was left of my mum's things. We finally went through them when I was 20, the same year I decided I could no longer have any contact with him. For over a decade, I lived my life without any communication with my father. Then, almost a year ago, I received word that he had passed away. Along with that news came the shocking revelation that he had transferred a substantial amount of money to me and put my name on the deed to a vacation home he and my mum had owned. It was the largest part of his estate, and it was all mine. His wife, now his widow, was blindsided. She had no idea he had left so much to me. She didn't even own the house they were living in. It had belonged to a friend of his. Somehow, he had arranged it so that I was the sole beneficiary of the family vacation home and a considerable amount of money. Despite her shock, my stepmother quickly tried to contest the inheritance, claiming that she and her children were entitled to a fair share. But the law was on my side. Everything had been handled before my father's death, and the assets were legally mine. Her attempts to sue were futile. I hadn't attended the funeral or had any other contact with her, so I was surprised when she somehow found a way to reach me. She insisted that I had a responsibility to look after my family, meaning her and her children with my father. But I had no interest in rekindling any form of relationship with them. My father had ceased being a part of my family a long time ago. I told her as much. I explained that her children were not my family, and that I owed them nothing. She accused me of being cold, selfish, and without morals. She claimed that her children had been cheated first by their father and now by me. But I wasn't swayed by her words. I ended the call and blocked her, but she didn't stop. She found me on social media, sending messages filled with anger and accusations. According to her, I was the villain in this story, a heartless person who had taken everything from her family. But I knew the truth. I wasn't responsible for the choices my father made, and I wasn't about to let anyone guilt me into giving up what was rightfully mine. As the days passed, I found myself reflecting more on the past, on the moments that had led me to this point. The memories of my father, though painful, surfaced more often than I liked. Despite the bitterness I felt, I couldn't help but wonder how things had gone so wrong between us. My mother had always been the glue that held our family together, and when she passed, it seemed everything unraveled. I remembered how, after her death, the house felt like a different place. The warmth and love that once filled our home were replaced by coldness and indifference. My father, who had once been a doting husband and father, became distant, angry, and unpredictable. He wasn't just grieving. It was as if he was determined to destroy any memory of the life we had before. I realized then that my estrangement from him had been a means of survival, a way to preserve the part of me that still held on to my mother's love and legacy. As the weeks went by, the legal matters surrounding my inheritance were finally resolved. I officially owned the vacation home, a place I hadn't visited since I was a child. It was a modest cottage by the lake, where my family had spent countless summers. The thought of going back there filled me with a mix of nostalgia and dread. But I knew I needed to see it again, to reconnect with the good memories that still lingered there. When I finally made the trip to the vacation home, I was struck by how little had changed. The same wooden dock stretched out into the lake, the same old oak trees lined the property. As I walked through the house, I was flooded with memories of my mother. Her laughter, the way she used to paint by the window overlooking the water, the evenings we spent playing board games as a family. For a moment, I felt like a child again, safe and loved in a world where everything made sense. But the illusion quickly faded. The reality of my father's actions, the pain he had caused, weighed heavily on me. I realized that this house, as beautiful as it was, also held the ghosts of a past I couldn't fully reclaim. It was both a sanctuary and a reminder of all that had been lost. Despite everything, I couldn't let go of the house. It was my connection to my mother, the one thing my father hadn't managed to destroy. I decided to restore it, to make it a place where I could remember the good times and create new memories. It would be a way to honor my mother's memory, to keep her spirit alive in the only place that still felt like home. As I worked on the house, I found a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in years. The physical labor, the attention to detail, the care I put into every repair, it all helped me heal in ways I hadn't expected. The cottage slowly transformed, becoming a reflection of the love and warmth my mother had once brought into our lives. It was no longer just a house, it was a tribute to her, to the family we once were. Meanwhile, my stepmother's attempts to contact me didn't stop. She continued to send messages, each one more desperate than the last. She accused me of abandoning my family, of being selfish and cruel. But I knew better. This wasn't about family, it was about money. She had no interest in me as a person, only in what she could gain from me. One day, as I was going through some old papers in the cottage, I found a letter my mother had written to me before she died. In it, she spoke of her love for me, her hopes for my future, and her wish that I would find happiness and peace in my life. She also mentioned the vacation home, saying she hoped it would be a place where I could always find comfort and solace. Reading her words brought tears to my eyes. It was as if she knew, even then, what I would need long after she was gone. She had given me this gift, this sanctuary, and I would honor her memory by making it a place of love and peace. After that, I stopped responding to my stepmother's messages entirely. I blocked her on every platform, cut off all communication. I realized that I didn't owe her anything. Not explanations, not apologies, nothing. My focus was on rebuilding my life, on finding the happiness my mother had wished for me. And so, I continued to work on the cottage, turning it into a place of refuge and beauty. It became a haven not just for me, but for the few people I allowed into my life. Friends who had stood by me through the worst of times, visited often. We spent weekends by the lake, sharing stories, laughter, and the peace that the place seemed to naturally bring out in people. I started painting again, just as my mother had, finding joy in the colors and creativity that had once been such a big part of our lives. It was a way of reconnecting with her, of keeping her spirit alive in my own small way. As time went on, the cottage became more than just a refuge. It became a symbol of my resilience and a place where I could reclaim my life. I found myself spending more and more time there, drawn to the serenity and simplicity of the lakeside life. The city, with all its noise and chaos, felt increasingly distant, like a past life I was slowly leaving behind. I began to think about what the future could hold. The restoration of the cottage had been a cathartic process. But I knew I couldn't stay in that bubble forever. I needed to move forward, to build a life that wasn't just about healing old wounds, but about embracing new possibilities. One afternoon, as I was painting on the porch, I received a call from an old friend. We had drifted apart over the years, mostly due to my own self-imposed isolation, but hearing her voice brought back a flood of memories. She had heard about my father's passing and wanted to check in to see how I was holding up. As we talked, she mentioned that she was organizing a charity event in the city, a fundraiser for a cause that was close to my heart, something my mother had been passionate about when she was alive. She invited me to come, to reconnect with old friends, and to contribute in any way I could. At first, I was hesitant. The idea of returning to the city, to face the people and places I had left behind, was daunting. But there was something in her voice, a warmth and sincerity, that made me reconsider. After the call, I sat on the porch, staring out at the lake as the sun began to set. The water shimmered in the fading light, and I could almost hear my mother's voice, encouraging me to take a step forward, to not let the past hold me back any longer. It was time to stop running, to start living again. A few weeks later, I found myself back in the city, standing outside the venue where the charity event was being held. The noise, the bustle of people, the bright lights, it all felt overwhelming at first. But as I stepped inside, I was greeted by familiar faces, warm smiles, and the kind of genuine affection that I hadn't realized how much I missed. The event was a success, raising more money than any of us had expected. I had contributed some of the funds I inherited, knowing that my mother would have wanted her legacy to support something meaningful. It felt good to give back, to be a part of something that wasn't just about me and my pain, but about making a difference. As the night went on, I reconnected with old friends, sharing stories and catching up on the years that had passed. There was laughter, a few tears, and a sense of camaraderie that I hadn't felt in a long time. I realized then that while I had been focused on healing myself, I had forgotten how much I needed the connections with others, people who cared about me, who remembered the good times, and who were there to support me through the bad. The charity event turned out to be a turning point for me. I started spending more time in the city, reconnecting with friends, and even taking on a few projects that aligned with my mother's passions. It wasn't just about moving on. It was about integrating the past with the present, about finding a balance between the life I had left behind and the one I was now building. But the cottage remained my sanctuary, the place I returned to when I needed peace and quiet. It was where I could think, create, and reflect. And as much as I loved the city, I knew that the cottage would always be my true home, a place where I could be myself, away from the pressures and expectations of the outside world. Then, one day, I received a letter in the mail. It was from my father's lawyer, informing me that there was one last thing my father had left for me, something he had kept in a safety deposit box, something he had never told anyone about. The letter provided instructions on how to access the box, along with a key. My heart raced as I read the letter. What could it be? Another apology? More money? Or something else entirely? I wasn't sure if I wanted to know. But my curiosity got the better of me, and a few days later, I found myself standing in front of the bank's vault, the key clutched tightly in my hand. When the box was opened, I found a small, leather-bound journal inside. It was old and worn, the pages yellowed with age. My father's name was inscribed on the cover in his unmistakable handwriting. I hesitated for a moment, then slowly opened the journal to the first page. What I found inside was unexpected. It wasn't a journal of my father's thoughts or feelings, but a collection of letters he had written to my mother during the early years of their marriage. They were filled with love, hope, and dreams for the future. As I read through them, I saw a side of my father that I had never known. A man who had once been deeply in love with my mother, who had cherished every moment they spent together. The letters were a revelation. They showed me that my father wasn't always the man I had come to despise. There was a time when he was happy, when he was a good husband and father. It was as if the man who had hurt me so deeply had once been capable of love and tenderness. And while it didn't erase the pain he had caused, it helped me understand that people are complex, that they can change, and that sometimes the best of intentions can lead to the worst outcomes. In the back of the journal, I found one last letter. It was addressed to me, written shortly before my father's death. In it, he apologized for everything, for the way he had treated me, for the mistakes he had made, and for the pain he had caused. He wrote that he regretted the way our relationship had ended, but that he understood why I had to leave. He hoped that the journal would help me see the man he used to be, and that maybe, in some small way, it could help me find closure. I sat there in the vault, tears streaming down my face, the journal clutched to my chest. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. Peace with my father, peace with the past, and peace with myself. The journal didn't change what had happened, but it helped me see that my father wasn't just the sum of his mistakes. He was a flawed, complicated man who had made bad choices, but who had also loved deeply and genuinely, at least for a time. With the journal in hand, I left the bank, feeling lighter than I had in years. I knew I still had a long way to go, but for the first time, I felt like I was on the right path. The cottage, the city, the people I had reconnected with, they were all part of this new chapter in my life, a chapter that was no longer defined by pain and loss, but by healing, growth, and the possibility of a brighter future.